Hi, everybody. I am Sarah Abernathy. I'm the Executive Director of the Committee for Education Funding, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today. We have two amazing panels talking about two topics that are of real interest currently. I want to give you a 1-minute overview about CEF, and then we'll turn it over to Emily Crawford from Vectis TC, who is CEF's president this year. For those who are new to CEF, we are the nation's oldest and largest education coalition. We are nonpartisan, nonprofit, a collaborative of 119 different education associations, institutions, and related organizations that together advocate for a greater federal investment in education along the continuum, covering early ed, K through 12, higher ed, adult and workforce development, and non-out-of-school educational resources like libraries and museums. And our advocacy this year is really important. This is a time when education funding is getting a lot of political attention, and we want to make clear how important these federal investments are to students, families, communities, and the economy. With that, I will turn it over to Emily to make some introductions and talk about our efforts.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so excited to be leading this today. I think it's maybe honestly my third year in a row leading this conference, so I'm excited to be here again. Today is an important opportunity to talk about some of the critical issues that students, educators, and communities face, and how through federal legislation, we can help resolve them. As a country underfunding education throughout communities, we have been doing it most significantly at the federal level for far too long. Given the current threat that the House's FY25 funding bill poses to federal education funding, it is more important than ever before that we all understand the stakes. Those cuts will harm students and future workers in every community across the country, from our youngest learners in pre-K, early education, to adults training for our nation's most in-demand jobs. The consequences will be immediate and lifelong, and the ripple effects will be felt in every part of American life. Millions of children, young people, and adults will be deprived of quality education that would help them grow into strong, productive, contributing members of our families, communities, companies, and country. Tens of thousands of teachers, counselors, administrators, and support staff, and even students will disappear from our classrooms and campuses. Millions of prospective skilled workers will be tossed aside, worsening our workforce shortage and potentially adding even more burden on our nation's safety net. Cuts of this magnitude would damage our economic future and threaten our global competitiveness. So this is what's at stake when we talk about federal legislation around education. So we invite the education advocates on this call to join us in our efforts to ensure that the House Appropriations Bill as written is not enacted, and that Congress invests in education. We recently launched a new advocacy campaign, and you can visit cef.org/advocacy to learn more and contact your members of Congress and activate your communities. With that, thank you again for being here today. We'll have two panels today, and I want to introduce our first speakers who will be discussing the educator workforce. So I'm excited to present to you Dean Clifton S. Tanabe, who serves as the Dean of the College of Education and a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Foundations at the University of Texas at El Paso. He previously served as a faculty member and chief of staff at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where he also directed the Leaders for the Next Generation program and co-directed the Hawaii Education Policy Center. He started his academic career as an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, where he founded and co-directed the Research Center for Cultural Diversity and Community Renewal. His scholarly interests include higher and K-12 education law and policy, educational and political philosophy, and educational access, and his articles can be found in a range of journals and publications. From the beginning and at its core, Dr. Tanabe's work has centered on leveraging the transformational power of education to improve individual and community outcomes. He holds a PhD in educational policy studies and a law degree both from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a member of CEF. Thank you for the CEF member, the Learning Policy Institute, for inviting Dean Tanabe. Kimberly Eckert is currently the Senior Advisor for Apprenticeship Development and Head of Instructional Innovation at Western Governors University. Previously, she served as the inaugural dean of Oxford Teachers College at Reach University and founded Educators Rising Louisiana. With 16 years of experience in education, Kimberly has been recognized as the 2018 Louisiana Teacher of the Year, a 2019 NEA Social Justice Activist of the Year national finalist, and a 2020 Global Teacher Prize honoree and ambassador. Kimberly also served as Deputy Assistant Superintendent of Educator Development at LDOE, the Louisiana Department of Education, and West Baton Rouge Innovative Programs Coordinator. Her expertise spans special education, literacy, and instructional coaching with a strong emphasis on problem-based learning. She is co-author of Flip the System US, How Teachers Can Transform Education and Save Democracy. In her free time, she is pursuing a PhD in Learning, Instruction, and Innovation. Thank you to CEF member the National Center for Learning Disabilities for inviting Dean Eckert to be a speaker today. And lastly, for this panel, we have Dr. W. Burke Royster, who became a superintendent of Greenville County Schools in South Carolina in 2012. The district is the largest public school system in the state, serving more than 77,000 students. Throughout his tenure, the district has seen notable progress in student achievement. A central initiative under Dr. Royster's leadership is Graduation Plus to increase student achievement and engagement by providing meaningful opportunities for every student to graduate with not only a high school diploma, but also college credit and/or an industry certification. Greenville County Schools overall graduation rate has increased by 12 points since 2012. And if you come from that community, you know 12 points is huge. So congratulations. The district has also seen big increases in graduation rates for traditionally lower performing students. Superintendent Royster's career in education spans over 40 years, encompassing roles as a middle school teacher, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and deputy superintendent. He holds a PhD in educational leadership and policies from the University of South Carolina, along with a master's in education and a bachelor's degree from Clemson University. Superintendent Royster belongs to CEF member Chiefs for Change, and we thank them for inviting him to be a speaker today. So with that, I will hand it over to Dean Tanabe for his presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Emily. Let me also say thank you for the opportunity to be with all of you today. I'm going to highlight some of the ways we have worked with federal teacher training programs, namely the Augustus F. Hawkins Centers of Excellence Program and the Teacher Quality Partnership Grant Program in our efforts to increase retention and to improve practice. Both of these amazing programs support our partnership-driven, region-wide collective impact focus on strengthening and diversifying the teacher pipeline in the El Paso region. In order to give you some context, let me say a little about our region. El Paso is home to approximately 164,000 PK-12 students, more than 90% of whom are Hispanic, 75% economically disadvantaged, 25 to 30% emergent bilingual. And in that context, the composition of UTEP's teacher preparation program reflects that of the region. Nearly 50% of our students are first generation, and nearly 70% identify as bilingual. Another context-based element of the work that we do at UTEP is that in El Paso, we work within a unique educational ecosystem. You see, the teacher workforce in El Paso is made up of about 11,000 educators spread over 12 independent school districts, both urban and rural. The teacher education program that I lead at UTEP is responsible for preparing about 70% of the region's entire teacher workforce. And those teachers care for and educate the students that make up about 80% of the UTEP student body. It is, in effect, an educational closed loop, where pointing fingers or assigning blame for student outcomes simply makes no sense. When I first arrived at UTEP, I would hear other deans from across campus complain about the region's K-12 school system and how the students were coming to UTEP unprepared. And I would say, well, frankly, you might want to point that concern right back at UTEP, or at least to me, because we prepare the teachers who prepare the students who come to UTEP. This reality drove our effort to build our teacher residency, which is a year-long, immersive, performance-based training experience focused on preparing day one ready educators. And because we are responsible for preparing the majority of the teacher workforce in our region, we planned from the very beginning to build this model to scale. We started this work in 2019, and as of last year, we are now fully scaled. Our model includes a deeply immersive, year-long, field-based experience where our students spend an entire school year in on-the-job training. We run pop cycles, that's pre-observation, observation, post-observation, with all of our residents, and we use timestamp video analysis and track their performance data. And they're supervised both by a mentor teacher who we select and train and a UTEP faculty member who is on site throughout the week. Finally, the vast majority of our students work, and they don't work like I did when I was in college. I worked for spending money, but our students work to pay bills, to feed children, to take care of family members. And I couldn't see how they would do the graveyard shift for an entire year and be able to perform in our intensive, immersive teacher residency training experience. Long story short, we worked extremely hard with partners across our region to build a stipend model. Today, every one of our teacher residents receives a stipend, which helps them to fully engage in that experience. But why go through all of this work, all of the work to fully redesign our teacher preparation program in the first place? The program that I inherited was okay. But for our team, an okay teacher preparation program, especially in our context, it didn't feel right. You see, while a third grade teacher who manages to stay in the profession for longer than 1 year, that teacher gets to do third grade over again next year. And while they may get a little better the next year, the third graders in their classroom this year only get to do third grade once. So our mission for our teacher preparation program and for our students is to have them prepared day one ready when they take the classroom, and to do that in our region at scale. In El Paso, we take a pipeline approach to teacher education. The Hawkins program supports our work at the beginning of the pipeline, where we have developed a partnership-based teacher recruitment model that includes coordination with early college programs at local high schools and developing paraprofessional pathways. Differently, the TQP grant is at the end of our pipeline, where we are implementing an aligned mentorship and induction model. At scale, all of this design and implementation work requires a lot of coordination and communication. And in order to do that, we established a region-wide teacher pipeline task force. This group is made up of regional school district leaders, local, state, and national foundation representatives, folks from our regional community college, and from UTEP, and we all work together. This body was formed to reinforce that fact, where we meet to set goals and surface resources. In addition to this region-wide body, we implemented what we call a shared governance structure with each of our district partners, where leaders and faculty from our teacher preparation program meet quarterly with school district leaders to share and make database decisions, discuss processes that are working or may need improvement, and analyze what's going well and what's not. If I have time, I might say a little more about the mentorship and induction work we're doing with the TQP program. The core principles of this work are to recognize that student success in the first 2 years of teaching is absolutely critical to long-term retention and teacher effectiveness, and to act on the reality that effective instructional coaching must be based on real-time and relevant performance data. Relevant and accessible data is at the heart of our model, which includes 2 years of individualized coaching that is strategically aligned with our teacher residency, both in structure and in process. A UTEP faculty member conducts on-site observations for these new teachers, including 4 walkthroughs and 2 recorded observations a year. New teachers in our program receive individualized coaching and participate in monthly cohorted professional learning workshops based on real-time data and focused on current issues facing beginning teachers. And while we also want to recognize these folks for doing this additional training. So we hold an end of the year recognition event where those teachers who successfully complete this program receive recognition and a certificate of completion. Let me end by sharing some bullet points related to current and anticipated outcomes of the work that we're doing. One, our current hiring rate out of our residency program is above 86%. Our first to second year retention rate for those hired teachers over the lifespan of our program is over 90%. And we're tracking the evaluation data of new teachers in our region who went through our residency program. It turns out that first year teachers from our program versus first year teachers from all other preparation programs perform about a third higher in every state teacher evaluation category. But what is really exciting is that in year two, these teachers from our program begin to widen the performance gap. The separation is clear. Their improvement trajectory is accelerating. An exciting outcome we hadn't predicted was that the district teachers who stepped up to mentor our resident teachers also improved their evaluation scores, in some cases by as much as 25%. The average evaluation score across all of our mentor teachers went up by 5%. We also survey our residents and find that they recognize and emphasize the value of the coaching support they receive. This is the big outcome. 200 teachers a year in this immersive, highest quality residency and mentorship model, 11,000 K-12 teachers in our region. In 5 years, we are starting our third year of being fully scaled. And because 90% of our graduates are hired right here in local school districts, this program at UTEP would account for roughly 10% of the total regional teacher workforce. We're tracking the outcomes of this impact, and we think it is beginning to be clear that it is a game changer. What do we need moving forward? In a sentence, we need greater federal and state partnership to fund residency, mentorship, and induction programs. When I told some of our technical assistant partners and initial funders early on that I wanted to pursue a year-long residency and a new teacher mentorship induction program, one actually rolled their eyes. She said, "You are one program. There are 12 independent public school districts in your region with well over 300 school campuses. How are you going to do that?" And she was right. At this point, our work in El Paso, at the end of the day, is really basically a demonstration project. We see the initial results of this work, and they look great. And we have shown that this work, with a clear growth strategy and support, can operate at scale. But we need the help of our federal and state partners to sustain and grow this work into the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dean Tanabe. I will now pass it over to Dean Eckert for her presentation, and Sarah will be moderating questions after Superintendent Royster. So Dean Eckert, please.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I'm cheering for you here, Clifton. I'm so proud of the work that you've done. Like, I love to hear about it. Fun fact, I'm actually stepped outside of the room from a new teacher experience here in Louisiana, where we have almost 90 teachers from South Louisiana. And so I actually took a day off from my job so that I could come here and serve in that capacity with my state with these new teachers. So it's given me so much life and so much fire, and I'm so honored to be able to speak to you all today. So I'm going to start off by just telling you a little bit about not only how much I love to teach, because that's actually all I want to do. Like, I want everybody to solve all these funding issues so that I could return to my classroom and do what I love, and arguably what I'm best at. But in my current role, so I'm actually pretty new to the job, only the past month. I'm now the senior advisor for apprenticeships and the head of instructional innovation with WGU. And that sounds very important, right? And then I'm actually freshly off of designing a program from the ground up where I served as dean with a university that's explicitly dedicated to apprenticeship degrees, so that paraprofessionals and school aides, anyone who's already in a school and working, and their districts feel like they have amazing potential to be teachers. That was the program that I wrote and that I served with, and that's what I'm trying to scale right now. And then I'll take a step back and just sort of remind folks, not that you needed to remember, but I did spend some time at the Department of Education. But none of that is important for what I'm about to share with you. It's that I've been an educator for 16 years, and actually up until last year, I was holding those roles and still teaching in my incredibly rural district in Louisiana. And even now, I'm working with girls who code, so I'm still in the local elementary school. And a lot of that is because I like teaching, but it's so much bigger than that. I became a teacher because I wanted to be the change I wanted to see, right? And I actually started off in social work, dabbled in law, and wasn't seeing the changes fast enough. So I can't underscore enough that I have now worked pretty much every possible side of education. And I still know that my biggest job right now is to clear away the hurdles that teachers can teach and that kids actually get the high quality education that they deserve and that they were promised. So because I've worked so many different spaces, right? The part that I'm most engaged with right now is in finding solutions to teacher shortage. Being that I'm still in a rural area and I'm still in a classroom, right? Any chance that I can get, I understand what happens if even one highly skilled teacher leaves the profession or if we never get the opportunity to have one at all. And I think that a lot of this stems from the fact I grew up on a bayou in Louisiana. As a student, I've never had access to a fully staffed school. And it's really important to really understand that teacher shortage, it's not new. COVID made it sort of sexy and everybody started to talk about it, but it didn't start a few years ago. And whenever you remember the fact that great teachers do not fall out of the sky, it takes years to become a great teacher. Just as I would imagine it takes years to really finely tune someone's craft as a doctor. But we don't have the luxury of time. There are more students than patients on any given day. And we don't have the luxury of residencies, and we need them that last 10 years. We hit the ground not only running, we hit it with like jetpacks ready to fly because kids need that from us. Their education isn't going to wait. The needs of our world aren't going to wait. And so I teach with urgency and I lead with urgency. So whenever I first started some of these things around teacher recruitment, it wasn't because it was a job that I was given. I was still a special education teacher, a high school teacher all day. I hadn't started dabbling in hybrid roles yet. Actually, the work caused that to happen. I was a teacher. I was an instructional coach. I was coaching new teachers for probably 13 years of the 16 that I was a classroom educator. And the teacher shortage was so astute for me. It was just so ever present because there was a time I was a third-year teacher and I was almost a veteran in the building. They were giving me responsibilities that I was not ready for whenever I first started to become an instructional administrator. And so seeing how difficult it was, and that was around probably 2017 to recruit teachers, I had to start to realize that so many plates have to spin because there's not one solution to a problem that's teacher shortage. There's no one thing that any of us could possibly do. And I started to see that as a teacher, understanding the peers that I was coaching, understanding that less and less people wanted to go into education, really starting to understand national polls that were put out when we were finally at a place in our society where over half the country was actively discouraging young people, the best and the brightest, to go into the teaching profession. And I think that spoke so highly of our society and my community, and that we understand what's at stake with education, but the minute we see somebody who would make an amazing teacher, we sort of funnel them into other fields, and we create conditions in the space where people don't want to come back to the scene of a crime. If they had a terrible experience, if they were in schools that were underfunded or understaffed, under-resourced, why would they want to return to that? And that is something that I knew going in as a high school special education and English teacher, that if I was going to have any slap in the bucket, anything, I was going to have to understand all of these things. But I'm a highly skilled teacher, and I'm very good at solving challenges and pretty much making miracles out of nothing. So I didn't see enough work happening in my own state. And so I actually worked with a lot of folks and sort of took it upon myself, where I was like teaching by day and driving hundreds of miles by night on my 2001 Kia to try to start first repairing and elevating the teaching profession and helping people, society, teenagers understand that teaching is so much more than sometimes they've been given, and that we could all be a part of solutions. We could all do more to be able to provide the education that that maybe we didn't have whenever we were young people. And it was also important to understand that we needed pathways for people to be able to do this. I think I was very naive in the beginning that, oh, I'll just start a club for kids and they'll want to be teachers if we just make it sound great enough. But that couldn't be further from the truth. It was in that moment that I realized that we already had people in buildings who at some point had to choose between going into intense debt or putting food on the table. And so maybe they became school bus drivers or they became school secretaries because they needed a job right then and there. And as someone who's going to be paying student loan debt into my third reincarnation, I hope I come back as a tree. I understand that is just not an option whenever you have mouths to feed and you have to put, food on the table and pay your bills. So we have this subset of folks who are already in buildings. And then we have folks who would finish completing their collegiate program if they could. So having to take a step back, what are the barriers? Even if we get people through the door, it is incredibly difficult to become a teacher. And it's not just because of college or classes. For a huge portion of the country, to become a student teacher, you're doing that for free. And it's one of the reasons why I'm definitely in Dean Tanabe's corner in that they pay stipends. That's such an isolated thing, though. That's something that if you happen to be in a state that has some legislation, or you happen to go to a college that's planned for that, that maybe you can luck up and get a stipend that's about $2,000. But understanding teaching is a 15-hour-a-day job, depending on where you're in. And to ask people to go through 3 years of undergraduate and then forego all ways of really meaningfully supporting themselves in that final year, it can't be done. And so it's not uncommon for us to see that people will make it to the finish line, but they can't cross over because they changed their major. Like, I can't go without a paycheck for a year. I just can't do it. And so it's interesting now that I've been working in higher education and seeing all of the challenges that happen on the other side, because it's super multifaceted, right? You start to understand that there are many other challenges to people becoming teachers, and that's one of them. But if you're not in a space that's able to really provide a high quality student teaching experience, you'll find that day one in the classroom is very different than the one that you trained for, very different than the one you pretended to have when you taught your teddy bears when you were 5. Today's public school classrooms, number one, they are full of solutions and possibilities. But if you haven't been trained well enough to see them, then there's no way you'll be able to untap your own potential to be able to untap that and the students in your classroom. And so having really high quality teacher residencies where teachers actually get paid so that they're doing the same work, right? But they're not getting paid. And then making sure that, their first time on the job isn't the first time that it's on the job. That's another piece that's incredibly important. And then whenever we wrap around with that, it's understanding, and oh my goodness, I've seen it far too many times. We lose people in that first 5 years at rates you just wouldn't believe. And they're different depending on the area, obviously different and way more challenging, arguably in the schools that need really consistent, great teaching the most, urban schools, rural schools, in fields like special education, which is mine, because it's challenging. But if you're not prepared for that, it's really tough. And I do believe no teacher starts by wanting to do a bad job. And I also don't think it's an issue of burnout. I think it's an issue of just sort of moral injury, where you wanted to do this thing and you get to this place where you're not supported and you don't feel like you're doing all the things you dreamed of, and you don't feel like you're really helping kids, and you don't feel like you can make it past the 1 year mark, much less the 5 year mark. And I've seen that too. I'm proud, this is just an aside, my years of coaching, I haven't lost a teacher from the profession yet, but that, first of all, that's a flex. Like, woo-hoo, you have no idea how special it is to be able to say that. But I can also tell you how difficult it is, and that I'm not special, but it is sometimes unique for a teacher to be able to have access to a really highly qualified, highly skilled instructional coach. Why? And so at all times, the teacher, the storyteller in me is just, this is a profession, right? And just think about this. If it was life or death and your medical resident wasn't trained to save your life, or if it was the luck of the draw, depending on if you would literally live or die, you might see a profession a little differently. And I could tell you now, after 16 years in this profession and seeing all the amazing things that happen when we get it right, I've also seen kids who have lost their lives. I've also seen kids who have taken lives, and I feel like I've failed them. And I wonder if I had been better trained. I wonder if I had trained teachers better, would we still have had those outcomes? So I'll always push back that for me, teaching is life or death. And we really need to look around at all the ways that we could support teachers. And it's not like you have to look far. It's not just in your own community. If you take a look at, funding IDEA and the funds that were promised, even that trickles down. And to me, I see it directly impact teacher shortage, because the less funding there is, the more burden there is on the teachers in the building, where the job you signed up for didn't include also doing 20 jobs that you didn't. And that is a reality of the classroom as well. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Emily with that, and just urge everybody to remember that literally, and you know this, but you're going to hear it again. And I'm a teacher. I could say things over and over until it sticks. But our society is just a direct reflection of what we create, buck to pass. And teachers are the bravest among us. We see that. We step up to the plate every single time. And so I'll just urge you all, to those who can't teach, do something that helps teachers.
Thank you so much. And I think Sarah said this at the start, but I think this is a great opportunity. If you're on this call watching and you think someone in your life should be hearing some of these words who are not on the call, this will be posted. This recording will be posted and you can share it with them. With that, I will pass it over to Superintendent Royster.
Excuse me. Thank you, Emily. I believe in some of the things I will say, you may hear some common themes. We're a great consumer of teachers. Now, fortunately, our turnover is very low compared to our state and compared nationally. Our turnover is about 10% in any given year. Now, having said that, there are a lot of things that we've done to reduce turnover. Number one, competitive salaries. We're not in the state noted for teacher pay, but we rank at the very top of the state. We're currently number 3, and we've been in the top 5 for several years now. But we moved there from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, being about number 24 in the state. There are all these other things, though, that go towards teacher satisfaction that help to retain teachers. One is we want to make sure we've got quality principals in our schools. That's essential to recruiting and retaining a quality teacher force, but especially in retaining them. Those things are very important. Staff development opportunities in areas that teachers identify where they need help and where we believe they need help. That's extremely important. We're also very fortunate. We have excellent facilities. We have excellent technology. We have a lot of support around our teachers and our classrooms. That makes a big difference. Still can't get enough applicants. Now, we were very fortunate. We started this year. We've got about 6,000 teachers. We started this year with a certified teacher in every class in the district on the first day of school. Now, that lasted till about 1 o'clock, and one of them quit at 1 due to some family issues that they had no control over. But in our size, as with many districts, some people will leave during the course of the year. That's just to be expected. But we will hire every year between that turnover of 10%, and we're a growing district. We may hire 700 to 800 plus teachers in any given year. Now, fortunately, we're able to hire about half or more of those are experienced. Because if all of those had to come from the ranks of first-year teachers, the state of South Carolina, the post-secondary institutions here, do not produce enough for us to hire to 700 or 800 teachers. That would not fill our need. So fortunately, we don't have to have but fewer than half of those. Now, we have excellent partnerships with post-secondary. One of our primary ones is with Clemson. Very similar to what Dean Tanabe described to you, we have a teacher residency program with Clemson. Those resident participants are doing a full year. They are receiving a stipend. The teacher they're working with is receiving a stipend from us. They're receiving a stipend as an apprentice through federal apprenticeship dollars. It may be how you leverage yours in Texas. I didn't hear that, but it's possible because you can get funding for teacher apprentices like many other industry apprentices. We do that. We have a federally funded program to add counseling certifications to existing teachers. That's another extreme shortage we have, qualified school counselors, that we're able to do that at no cost to the participants in that cohort. We have our own, we call it the GATE program, but it's our own program to take a person with a 4-year degree and train them in the pedagogy of teaching over really a 3-year period, but intensively over 2, They go to work in year one, though. What they have is the academic background based on their 4-year degree. We're able to operate this in 19 areas of certification. We were the first district in our state to be approved by the State Department to do this. We have had extremely high rates of success with it and high retention with it. And we believe the key to that is something we learned in year one, and that is 1 year of having a mentor is insufficient. So we went to 2 years and we pay the mentors. We greatly increased their stipend. We believe that has been a key to the success of that program. And we've had as many as 100 in a cohort at a time. And realizing they're going to be in there for 2, really kind of going into their 3rd year. That's provided a great avenue for us to grow our own, but really kind of convert our own from people in the community. As you look at grow your own, we're also trying to do that. We've greatly pushed in our district what we call graduation plus. We want every graduate of our high schools to leave us with college credit or industry certification. So within that pathway, and currently 81% of them do, one of the other or both. We've developed a couple of teacher pathways, but one, the short version of which is you get your first year as a freshman free with us. That includes at least 2 entry-level College of Ed courses. This is a partnership with Greenville Technical College, which in the state of South Carolina, the technical college system is the community college system. So you're doing that while you're in high school. You can leave as a senior, matriculate to Greenville Tech, take year 2 free. So now you've reached 2nd year status. If you've followed the courses that are prescribed, had a C average or better, you're automatically accepted into Clemson for year 3 and year 4. Now 3 and 4, that's going to cost you something. But year 1 and 2 right now has 0 cost to the participants. If you choose to stay year 3 at Clemson, you'll leave with a master's degree. So we have begun now to see, it's taken us a while to get that off the ground. As you might imagine, something like that requires a fair amount of bureaucratic, I was trying to think of a nice term for it. It requires going through a lot of bureaucracy. I think probably the deans are very familiar with what I'm talking about. The desire to do something doesn't equal the speed with which it can sometimes be done. But basically the approvals we got for that, which as you can imagine might be very numerous, required approvals at Commission on Higher Ed level in our state. It required approvals within the university in both admissions and in the College of Ed. It required their accrediting body to agree to it. It required those same things in a little different manner, but at the technical college or community college level. That was all accomplished in 18 months. So we are now seeing students who are matriculating into Clemson. The first couple of students, they will be in their senior year this year. And we started it centered in one high school. We're expanded it. We're in 10, we have 15 total high schools. We're in 10 now. We anticipate being able to be in all 15 within the next 2 years. So really creating our own pipeline within our system. And the greatest advantage to that is what I described already to you. Those first 2 years, there is no cost to those students for 2 years of college. Through our agreement with the community college, our faculty serving as adjunct faculty or utilizing their faculty. So those are some very, very strategic efforts that we have put in place to try to help with the teacher pipeline issue. The other one that I would mention just briefly is we are also working with advancing, because I believe Dean Eckert made mention of people in jobs in schools that aren't teachers. Some of whom may have a year of college, some may have 2. So we're working now with a program to take some of our paraprofessionals or people in other jobs in the system that have perhaps a base of college and moving them into teaching. And we've gotten great cooperation with the universities and through our State Department to manipulate their student teaching experience where they don't have to quit their job. Because that point's been made earlier, these people are having to put food on the table. We need to be able to get them in a role where they can earn money, maybe as an aide in a classroom, so they can still put food on the table and take the classes they need to take to get them in as a certified teacher. And we've had some degree of success with that already. And I believe that eats up all my time, though there are a lot of other things to talk about related to this subject. Hopefully I've given you some insight into the things that we're trying to do.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear the three of you all talking slightly different perspectives on the same type of issue. I want to open it up to some questions from the audience, but also wanted to start with one directly. Dean Tanabe, you talked about the Hawkins Centers and the teacher quality partnerships. And Dean Eckert, you talked about some other apprenticeship programs, and I know that Superintendent Royster mentioned both state and federal funding for a variety of things. The funding bill for the Departments of Health, Education, and Labor that the House Appropriations Committee has approved for this coming year eliminates every single federal education program, teacher training program at the Department of Ed. That includes Hawkins, that includes teacher quality partnerships. It includes the much larger $2.2 billion Title II teacher and school leader program. I wondered if each of you or whoever wants to would talk a little bit about what would happen, what you see to the pipeline for future teachers if all the federal funding were to be eliminated.
Well, we mentioned just the concept of a pipeline many times, I think, in this call, and there's really no way to do kind of sustainable growth work in teacher preparation in our community without understanding the handoffs that take place within that pipeline. Where different organizations need to kind of lean at one point and others at another point. Hawkins and TQP are the bookends for our pipeline. They create the ability for us to drive from the beginning of that effort, from recruiting in high schools, from developing those partnership programs, from being in the PTEX into our program, then allowing our transition into career to just retain folks through those first 2 years. So it's been fundamentally important to have those partnerships with both of those programs, both in design and development, but in being able to test and work on outcomes and launch programs that are so hard to do just off of your own skin. So yeah, incredibly important to have that for us, for our work and what we've been able to do.
And I'll just add there, it chills the blood in my veins to think of that thought, because the effects wouldn't just happen in the immediate, obviously, right? So it's not just with teacher prep or the pipeline there, although that is massive, because obviously with cuts at best, other things get cut, and you keep things going, but we don't live in a perfect world. So if a college is having trouble, right, if they can't sustain the programming or the quality of the programming, then tuition has to go up. You have to pay people to do their jobs. And whenever you look at that, there's just in terms of equity and the impact of that, if they're raising tuition, then you're once again pricing people out, right? That's massive. And then within the school, if you're not able to really provide high quality mentoring or coaching, which schools do you think are going to be the ones who are maybe receiving teachers who have lesser skill in preparation? Like it all is like a completely never ending cycle if we pull things. And then I was also thinking just the long term, because it's not just that. Schools aren't able to really prepare school leaders. There's not as much funding for ongoing professional development. We can't say we would like to be a literate society and, and integrate all literacy programs if we don't have people like just opening the doors and welcoming the children in and keeping them safe. We can't have a high quality education system from start to finish if we're continuing to make chops, because it has to come from somewhere. And I could just tell you, it's not like we have to wait, because in many cases, the funding's not enough. Like, thank you so much, and please don't stop it. But I've been in areas where it's not even enough the way that it is. And so I will tell you right now, you can go and pretend maybe that these things don't happen, but why are folks like Superintendent Royster and Dean Tanabe and I working so hard with like paraprofessionals and people already in the building? Because sometimes they're already the teacher of record. You can't have no one in a classroom. And so just understanding how often schools have to make impossible decisions and put folks in who aren't qualified, whether with content or with connection, whatever it is, but you have to have someone in front of kids. And so there's just this world we like to pretend we live in, and then there's the actual world where kids are still showing up that need an education. We still have a society that demands that we maintain some type of competitive status in our country. And so for me, it really is start to finish. I can see the through line. If funding goes away, democracy is over. I don't mean to be that cataclysmic, but truly, if the backbone of a great society is its education system, to me, and why I have this urgency in the classroom and in higher ed and in advocacy spaces, is because I can see the effects. They'll be scaled, but I can assure you that I have seen them as a teacher, as a community member, as a child. Having a child in the school system, we don't have to look far to see what happens whenever spaces aren't funded. They are right under our noses even now.
Thanks. And I want to ask Superintendent Royster, sort of, what are your biggest challenges? You talked about having every class fully staffed for about 5 hours on the first day of school until that changed. What are your biggest challenges facing your district in filling all vacancies in the education workforce? Is it training? Is it money for staff salaries, the pool of available trained personnel, something else?
Well, everything I described to you, we could do more of if we had more funding to do it. If we lose the federal funding we currently have, that basically guts everything that I talked to you about. Not that we don't put some local dollars in it, but primarily it guts that. The other thing that it does, we mentioned that earlier, teachers are not all about level of salary, though that's extremely important. The other key to keeping teachers is a quality principal. We didn't get into those kind of programs, but we run programs to enhance the skills of our assistant principals to become principals, and for our teachers who wish to become assistant principals. All those are funded through those current revenue streams. That's certainly devastating to us. The biggest thing we've noticed, but it all goes back to having more applicants. If you talk to our principals now, and they talk to you about teacher applicants, there's some schools that have always had more applicants than others. That's true probably of everywhere in the country. Whether you're a principal that has historically had a large number of quality applicants or a smaller number, what without exception they will tell you is the number of quality applicants now compared to 5, 6, 7 years ago is far smaller. One of the most important things we do at the district level is hire principals. Just like one of the most important things a principal does is hire teachers. Those are the two single most impactful individuals in the system to student attainment. Quality principal, quality teacher. So some of our most important work, selecting the right people, quality people to be in those roles. 6, 7 years ago, when finalists came to me to interview for the principalship, the step right before me, we use a multi-step process, is a committee that would include people from the school community, experienced educators, this sort of thing. There's a screening panel before that. So it's a multi-step process. It aligns very much with the standards of the Wallace Foundation work that's funded quality principalship, that sort of thing. The short story here, though, is that last group, I expect them to send me three candidates. 5 to 7 years ago, they would ask, could we not send you 4 or 5? Because all these people are great. What I hear now is, well, we know you want 3, but we really think there's only 2. That's a pretty small story, but that says a lot about the candidate pool as far as the quality of people within it. So we need to expand the pool both in number and in number of quality candidates. And the only way to do that are the multiple ways that you've heard here today and ways we've not yet identified as being additional pathways to do that.
Thanks. I had someone emailed me a question right before the panel started, and it's a question for Dean Eckert. I'm very concerned about the shortage of specialized instructional support personnel in schools. Without a full contingent of special ed and general ed teachers, students suffer. Are you aware of any efforts that impact this supply of specialized instructional support personnel?
Yes. And I just want to consensually hug whoever sent that out. So yes, and I'm going to start off by saying that sometimes we're very good at sort of siloing, and we do that. But make no mistake, every teacher is a special education teacher. You just have to decide as a teacher if you're going to be a good one or not. And because kids don't walk through the doors with labels. So I cannot underscore that enough. That really every teacher deserves to be trained to teach a variety of disabilities and neurodivergent brains. So something that is important to think about, you do have programs that, and I'll even start with the pre-educator work that I started actually with high school students. A lot of that was because I wanted to expose them to spaces where special education, where they can understand it and be in spaces. Because even if you do want to be a teacher, oftentimes it's like, I really love chemistry and I want to teach. Okay, great. But we need you to have a 4.0 in humanity, not necessarily a 4.0 in chemistry, like see the people first. And so these early exposure programs are incredibly important. And I think that Grow Your Own programs are doing a very good job of that because they have these middle and high school students on sort of rotations where they're able to experience things and they're able to sort of replace the unknown with more passion for being able to do the work. It's also important, like anytime we have a teacher prep program, obviously we have that opportunity within residencies and whenever you have pre-residencies to be able to expose students to all of these things. And I'll just say, and I mentioned this earlier, that whenever it comes to funding and how disconnected sometimes it could seem, well, I work at a charter school and I don't have students with disabilities or whatever it is, we are all in this together and just understanding that money has to come from somewhere. So if things aren't fully funded, or if we're not getting enough opportunities to really invest the way we should in the training of special education teachers, they're going to get pulled. I was pulled to be a full-time English teacher. And it's honestly because, you know, I had 23 kids on my caseload, but go teach 120 kids, we need you here. So just truly everything is together. And that's what I would sort of just have people walk away with, saying the funding is all in it. Yes, there's lots of things coming in, but it's all about its exposure because you can't really solve challenges that you're not aware of, whether that comes from a funding perspective or that comes for people who are interested in entering the teaching profession. You are needed and there is a place for you, and the world's even bigger than the one you went to school experiencing.
Thank you. We have a couple other questions. One of them, well, first I wanted to talk a little bit, ask Dean Tanabe, do you think that the requirements and demands for new teachers how have they been changing over time? And is it easier or harder for teachers to develop the skills needed to be highly qualified? We hear a lot about existing and looming growing educator shortages as the demographics of the current teaching workforce change. Curious to see how you see this going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a central principle underlying the work that we the redesign work that we did in our program. It's really to try to get alignment with the reality of the job today. And the only way to do that, I think everybody on this panel has already echoed this, is to have teachers in preparation in practice. They need to be at schools. They need to be working with highly qualified and trained mentor teachers. They need to understand not just the subject matter that they are expert at, but also the incredibly varied level, differentiated level of instructional delivery that's required for successful educational experiences. All of that happens, under the tutelage of experienced and excellent teachers. It doesn't happen in a classroom at the university. So I'll also, before I get off here, Sarah, I'll put in one last. I want to kind of highlight Superintendent Royster's point about applications. It really comes down to getting folks into the profession. The support that we've gotten federally has allowed us to do creative work on that front end. But the reality is that folks, we work with even some of our mentor teachers who are excellent, who are not, and they're doing a good job, but they're not necessarily encouraging some of the students that we're working with to go into the profession because it's hard. And so the challenges are not, they're not kind of small in kind of, there's pockets of, folks, areas of the region or the country that aren't doing well. It's pervasive. It's ubiquitous. We've got to figure out a way to elevate the teaching profession so that on the front end of it, people who are looking for those careers, young people are thinking, this is something both where I can make a difference, I can do a good job, I can support a family, and I can be a part of a community that leads to something bigger than me. And we can't do that at scale without help from the federal government and the state government, period.
Well, and I should have pointed out when I was talking about the bill proposed by or approved by the House Appropriations Committee that's funded for next year that cuts Department of Ed funding by a huge percentage, but eliminates all teacher training programs. The counterpart bill approved by the Senate Appropriations Committee does not do that. And in fact, it slightly increases funding for Department of Education. So those are the two bookends of what Congress will be discussing when it returns after the election to finalize funding for all government programs. And we're obviously hoping very strongly that the Congress approves the greatest possible investment in education, not for teacher development programs or teacher and school leader programs, but also for other direct and indirect supports for students, for families, for education, access to higher ed, access to workforce training, programs that provide services for students all along from early ed on upward. I wanted to end with one last question, which is a very general one, which is, are there areas of the educator workforce where you think more federal funding would have the most impact? Where do you see the biggest needs for federal investment going forward in this area? Not sure who wants to take a stab at that first.
I mean, I'll be glad to speak to that. The one that I already mentioned that we already fund in part is developing principals. And the other thing, particularly for school districts of moderate to large size, are programs to help develop district leadership. There's also a shortage of people that are quality candidates coming into senior leadership positions at the district level, up to and including the superintendency. So positions like that. The ability to fund training for support positions who interact with instructional people and interact with students, as far as how to better those interactions, how to better understand how the system works. Because we operate all kinds of systems within the school system to support schools, classrooms, and students. So in those areas would be helpful to have funding available to develop and implement programs for those purposes.
And I'll chime in and just keep in mind, I'm outside the door of a new teacher training and support group where two of the teachers have already said like they were on the verge of sort of quitting, and we're only 9 weeks into the school year, but for the fact that we had this time together today to keep on training. So I can say there is no one spot in the pipeline because it's a pipeline. I even argue it's a circle. We definitely need funding on the front end because you have to have the support. You have to have recruiting. I think we actually need to think a lot smarter about how we're intentionally recruiting this profession as well. To Dean Tanabe's point, right? Elevating and then intentionally recruiting people who are most likely to be able to stay. And then on the other end, you absolutely have to have ongoing professional development. And again, because it's something that we're able to more easily see, you would never place a doctor unless you're just, just sort of out there like, okay, you graduated, farewell, and then have them perpetuate the same practices that were good 30 years ago, but they're not anymore. Teaching is the same. Like every single day, the rate of what needs to be learned changes. What's needed from leaders changes to be able to support teachers that are constantly changing and evolving in their practice. And that's why you've got to sort of think about it more of a circle, less as a pipe, because the more that you put into each phase of that, so I would say from the very beginning and then through the lifetime of a teacher's time as a practitioner, things are changing. And if you want teachers to be able to sort of rise to the occasion and building principles to be able to support that level of change so that kids can actually function in the world that's dated on the calendar and not from 50 years ago, there's no one spot where money can just land because it's a profession and it evolves. And we have to be able to change and evolve with it to be able to give the most that we can to our kids and our communities.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate your taking the time to join us for this. I think that, over the last couple of years, focus on needs in the educator workforce has, risen when suddenly there was a lot of attention to what teachers and schools do during the pandemic, and then risen again recently with a lot of political conversation about the role of the federal government in education. And I feel like this is going to be an ongoing question about the need for federal support and federal investment in teacher training and in education. And Congress is going to continue to have a chance to debate this as they start and finish fiscal year 25 appropriations, and then very quickly we'll start the process again for fiscal year 26. Those who know me know that I tend to talk about dollars and I talk about charts and I talk about tables, but what really matters is what is happening for students, for teachers, for the educator workforce, all of which involves a really blended stream of federal, state, and local and private funding that altogether doesn't matter to the student or probably to the teacher where the funding source is. What matters is that there's the resources available to meet the needs. Feel like we could talk at great length about growing needs and the fact that the federal government's resources and support are not continuing to grow. So I appreciate your taking the time to join us. The next panel is going to talk about some of the different ways that federal government supports students, not necessarily directly to school districts or for support for teacher salaries and teacher training, but for other things. But we will turn to them next. But meanwhile, I want to thank you very much for joining us. And Emily, if you want to introduce the panelists for the next panel, we will follow up with everybody afterward. And there's some resources we want to provide, and I'll continue to put in the chat a couple of the resources that CEF has on its website. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much to our first panel. This is a perfect segue into the second panel, which will hopefully provide us with some ideas and reflection on how some of the issues that the first panel talked about have been addressed, or hopefully someday will be addressed through legislation. So as we did in the first panel, I will introduce the panelists in speaking order and then turn it over to each one of them before Sarah moderates a Q&A section. Taylor Maag is the Director of Workforce Development Policy at Jobs for the Future, where she spearheads the development and implementation of policy solutions designed to enhance the nation's workforce so that employers have the talent they need to remain competitive and that individuals acquire the skills and supports needed to thrive in the evolving economy. Prior to joining JFF, Taylor created and led the New Skills for a New Economy project at the Progressive Policy Institute, which focused on policy interventions to expand economic opportunity for workers without four-year degrees. In her previous role at JFF, she played a pivotal role in shaping the organization's federal and state policy agenda, with a particular emphasis on workforce reform, post-secondary education access, and federal poverty alleviation. Taylor holds a Master of Public Policy from Georgetown University, which is a CEF member, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Connecticut. Bryce McKibben is the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Hope Center at Temple University. He was previously the lead higher education policy advisor for Senator Patty Murray of Washington, chair of the U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Many of us know it as the HELP Committee. He has also held roles within the Association of Community College Trustees and the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Education and Labor. As an undergraduate, Bryce was a student advocate and served as president of the Washington Student Association. Bryce holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Washington and a master's in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School, which is another CEF member. Tara Thomas is the Government Affairs Manager at AASA, the School Superintendents Association, where she monitors, evaluates, and influences the legislative and regulatory actions of the federal government. In this role, she represents AASA's advocacy priorities on Capitol Hill, including appropriations, child nutrition, early childhood, rural and higher education, and serves on CEF's board of directors. Prior to joining AASA, Tara was a policy associate for the Girl Scouts of USA Public Policy Office. She began her career in Florida in the House of Representatives in the state, working for then ranking member of the K-12 Education Committee. With that, I will hand it over to Taylor to present.
We're actually going to do this panel a little bit differently. We thought that rather than having each person talk about their area, we would sort of set this up more as a conversation. It seems like, at least in the CEF world, I think a lot of people are very familiar with the Labor HHS Education Appropriations Bill that I was just talking about, but I don't think people are as familiar with some of the other federal legislation that provides support for students and for education and workforce training. It seemed like some of those pieces of legislation also have the possibility of getting some attention from Congress in the waning months of this session. You never know what might happen, but I thought it might be helpful if each of you could talk about some of the programs that that you work on and describe how they're mostly quite different from the direct federal government, state education association, money out to school districts that support K-12 funding in general, and also from the higher ed funding, much of which is either given out in loans and grants to students or goes directly to institutional support. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Taylor, do you want to talk a little bit about the workforce development world, which I know is a very different beast than the education direct funding world?
Thanks, Sarah, and I'm so excited to be here. So thanks, CEF, for having me. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a policy that's, a very critical partner to our education system, but is definitely has a different infrastructure and funding model, and to that point, different funding levels. So we'll be as brief as I can to talk about a little bit of that before, and happy to go into other programs and details in the workforce development space. I'm going to start by talking about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This is the legislation that guides America's public workforce system. Our nation's workforce system is responsible for an array of activities, primarily focusing on career services, which include skills assessment, career navigation, resume building, and job search for job seekers and current workers. It also provides education and training through avenues like individual training accounts or customized training for employers or other work-based learning opportunities. What's unique about the workforce system is it not only serves individuals, so students, job seekers, workers, but also businesses. And so a big piece of the work of the system is working with employers. So they also have resources going to business services, which include sector partnerships, job fairs, and other activities, as well as strategic functions of the board. Again, I won't get too in the weeds on the system structure, but I do think it's interesting to note that basically from the federal level, It then funds are administered through state workforce boards. So every state has a workforce board. It administers WIOA funds to local areas. These local areas are similar to local education areas or school districts across the country. And there are roughly 550 local workforce areas across the nation to support the services I just mentioned. Obviously, these local areas have huge implications for the success of America's workforce, but also the vitality of the communities that they're serving. While the workforce system infrastructure is robust, the funding of the system is not. So we will very briefly go into some of the funding to set the stage. So federal funding, and I know we have some more post-secondary experts like Bryce on the panel who might talk more about this, but federal funding for post-secondary education and workforce development specifically totals around $58 billion annually. This includes the Pell Grant and also federal programs that provide education and training assistance for military veterans, because some of the Pell Grant programs and GI programs can cover some more workforce-oriented training, although not exclusively. So if we look beyond Pell and veterans programs, the U.S. only invests roughly $16 billion annually in initiatives that provide workforce-focused education, employment, and training assistance. This funding is divided among 17 education and workforce development programs, and this includes career and technical education, adult education, and vocational rehabilitation programs, as well as other programs authorized under WIOA. I just say that because, you know, we have a little money that's spread across a lot of different programs, which of course is a large concern. Just to contextualize a little bit within our nation's workforce system, in fiscal year 2023, funding for WIOA formula grants, which is the primary employment and training assistance resources for adults, for young people, and dislocated workers, was only $3.3 billion for all 50 states. So I mentioned those 550 local areas. All of those resources were shared across that $3.3 billion. So just to show kind of the drastic underinvestment in the system currently. These levels are down 50% from fiscal year 2000 when factoring in inflation. And actually, investment in workforce development was highest in our country in the 1970s. If we were to match that level today, policymakers would need to increase annual WIOA spending to about $35 billion in these programs alone. So just shows the gap that we've been seeing in the past couple of years. And it is kind of shocking, especially today when we know our economy is rapidly changing and the system's infrastructure is critically important to meet student, learner, and worker needs. I don't want to be totally pessimistic, though. We do have some progress being made, which is very exciting. Right now, Congress is in the process of reauthorizing the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act to better meet our 21st century workforce needs. This spring, the House passed the bipartisan A Stronger Workforce for America Act, and the Senate is currently working on a bipartisan bill as we speak, knock on wood. I'm happy to go into more details about both bills, but some of the commonalities, just to set the stage for the conversation today, is that both bills include a greater emphasis on education and training. So obviously that has huge implications for the education system and how these systems work together. In both bills, education and training is emphasized through individual training accounts, but also community college partnerships and youth apprenticeship programs. The bills also want to ensure that services are not only more demand driven, so ensuring that employers are really driving the skill development so it does lead to in-demand employment, but also balancing the unique needs of workforce system clients who tend to be those that are underemployed, recently dislocated, or facing increased barriers to employment. So there was a lot of focus around the quality of post-secondary credential programs offered through the system, and also the inclusion of supportive services. So the last thing I'll add before passing it to my other panelists is, JFF, the organization I'm representing, we are generally supportive of the tweaks Congress is making to the legislation right now. But I will just say, without additional resources, the WIOA system will continue to be unable to meet its full potential, with just more activities to offer without the resources to do them effectively. So I think it's a really key piece of the education and post-secondary education puzzle. And I'm really excited to talk more about how I think WIOA and workforce development generally can be thought about more as we talk about education reform and also education funding. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. Tara, do you want to go next and talk? You and I had a good conversation before about school nutrition programs and how that, in fact, is not something that is part of the Farm Bill, but could potentially be tweaked by the Farm Bill. I think this is something that a lot of folks have understandable confusion about.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to talk about this. So thank you for having me. School nutrition, when it comes to the K-12 space, school nutrition is one of the other key programs in terms of funding for K-12 schools. So there are a few school nutrition programs. The biggest are National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. These are key programs that kids rely on every day for meals. And we've all seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Kids need to eat and have food and not be hungry in order to actually learn and be prepared to learn in the classroom. So these are really important programs that for schools, and these are considered appropriated entitlements or appropriated mandatory. So the funding is a little different, but it does come out of the Department of Agriculture and not education. And we can get into all of the different proposals that AASA supports and numerous other organizations support to improve these school nutrition programs and ensure they don't have a negative impact on schools' overall budgets and ensure that they're meeting kids' needs. But usually when Congress does this, and there's individual proposals that are out there right now to fix these programs, but usually when Congress does it, they do it through the Comprehensive Child Nutrition Reauthorization. And that is that's the bigger package, right? That Congress always needs a big vehicle for comprehensive review. And so it's the Child Nutrition Reauthorization. And this Congress, we haven't seen that. The last proposal we saw was in 22 with when Chairman Bobby Scott came forward with a proposal. And so right now, everyone is focused really on the Farm Bill. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes in, right? Because Farm Bill has SNAP, which is a key program. And I think Bryce can talk about that when you're talking about overall needs for students for sure. And then it has rural development pieces to it. So it indirectly supports students, but it has historically not included child nutrition or school nutrition. I think that's the key, school nutrition programs. And that's really mainly because of jurisdiction. So in the House, the Education and Workforce Committee is the one who is in charge of school nutrition programs, while the House Agriculture Committee is in charge of the Farm Bill. And so usually, especially when you're talking about the Senate side as well, they want to keep those jurisdictions separate so it doesn't get confusing when they send it down to the House. And so historically, Farm Bill does not include school nutrition programs. It has every now and then, and there's always the ability, and if there's a will, there's a way in Congress, right? But, and so, you know, we've seen like 2008, there were some tweaks made to fresh fruits and veggies programs. In, I think, 2014, 2018, there were some Buy American provisions that were included that impact the school national school lunch programs. So there's some tweaks that can be made. And at the end of the day, they can add it into Farm Bill if they really want to, if they want to make big changes. But historically, it's typically set aside for the child nutrition reauthorization.
Bryce, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other sort of indirect support for student basic needs that isn't what I think some people might normally think about as federal education funding, but in fact is federal funding that supports the ability for people to pursue an education?
Absolutely, Sarah, and thanks so much for having me today. On the higher ed front, when we think about programs that actually reach students directly or indirectly and their families, it really is such a maze of different funding streams and different bill authorizations that directly impact the needs of students. It's actually a tremendous amount of overlap between what Tara was talking about in terms of K-12 family well-being and child nutrition space and the types of food needs that students in higher education have, which I'll get to in a minute when we talk about the Farm Bill. But generally, I like to categorize the realm of programs that impact student basic needs as both the HEA and all the non-HEA programs. So the Higher Education Act obviously sets out all of the rules and parameters for the different programs that directly impact student financial aid. It also governs all of the competitive grant programs that individual colleges and universities or their systems receive to help bolster the type of financial aid that is being provided. So, you know, you've got your classic Pell Grants, direct loans, campus-based aid, teach grants, all those Title IV programs. We've all heard of them. They're familiar that they have to be reauthorized or they should be reauthorized every couple of years for Congress to be able to update the rules in those programs. HEA was last authorized in 2008. Now we're waiting. It's a difficult slog to be able to update those programs. But financial aid definitely has a direct impact on student basic needs because the money that's left over after tuition and fees, if there is any in the financial aid space, can generally be used for housing, food, transportation, childcare, the other essential expenses that students face when they're enrolled in college. But the HEA also has a bunch of competitive grant programs, like I mentioned, that directly impacts colleges. One of the biggest ones we've been focused on recently is the C-Campus program, the Child Care Access Means Parents in School program. A little more than $60 million now provided each fiscal year. It's been received a couple of increases in recent fiscal years. This is both an appropriations and an HEA conversation, but we know now that about 1 in 5 undergrads are parenting students. There are a number of people who have dependents while they're attending higher education. So whether or not colleges can create on-campus childcare resources is an important conversation, and we track that in both the legislative and the authorizing space. There's also a big bucket of programs under what we call FIPSE, the Fund for Improvement of Post-Secondary Education. There's 7 programs right now, but it changes a little bit from year to year. These are the smaller discretionary programs that Congress tends to fund in the annual appropriations process that can bolster the types of things they want to see that colleges should be doing. One of which is the Basic Needs Grant, helping colleges and systems scale up interventions that can actually support students in gaining access to public benefits, building affordable housing on campus, connecting them to transportation resources, doing the kind of outreach that supports their basic needs. It's also where the Post-Secondary Student Success Grant program lives. And perhaps most notably recently for the individual institutions, FIPSE is the umbrella where we park all of the congressionally directed spending or the earmarks. Now, a lot of the campuses recently have been using the CDS process to sort of ask for potential projects that they weren't able to get funded through maybe their individual state legislature. But I think a really innovative thing we're seeing in the earmarks process is that some institutions are using that to bolster the interventions that meet students' basic needs. So they might be using it to build an affordable housing complex or help expand access to affordable food or transportation services on their campus. So there is a real overlap between the earmark or the CAS process and individual basic needs. And then outside of the HEA, there are just a whole range of programs. I won't go into them all, but I will just say the Farm Bill, like Tara mentioned, is really important to us right now, in part because students, many students do qualify for the SNAP program. That is one of the things that Congress is going to be revisiting as part of this Farm Bill process is what are the rules that govern whether someone who's enrolled full-time in higher education, or more than half-time actually, in higher education can qualify. It's pretty restrictive under the current rules, and that's causing a little bit of difficulty in students being able to qualify for the SNAP program and exacerbating their food security. But the Hope Center and a bunch of other organizations are working to try to guide Congress to remove some of those barriers so that they can be able to stay enrolled in college or to pursue post-secondary education in the first place, because some of these rules and public benefits often prevent people who currently receive benefits from being able to access higher education, therefore preventing them from upskilling, from being able to obtain the degrees and credentials they might need. So we have a pretty wide grab bag. Sorry to sort of name the alphabet soup of different programs that touch students, but both HEA and non-HEA public benefits programs are having a direct impact on their financial security.
Thanks. And I feel like this is, I put a couple of the acronyms in the chat just because they're like, I think in our world, we use WIOA and HEA as words, but not sure that everyone else does. I also feel like have to just mention another acronym that you're talking about, C-Campus, the Child Care Means Parents in Schools program. That in the House Appropriations Committee bill is zeroed out, and then the Senate Appropriations Committee bill would get an increase from $75 to $80 million. I feel like these are all, 80 million, 70 million, $1 billion. They're all big numbers, but in fact, they do mean something when it translates into support for individual students to allow them to continue or to start getting additional education and training. And that sort of segues into a question I want to ask that gets directly to something that all of you were obliquely at least talking about, which is how does this, this sort of non-direct education funding, how does that impact teaching and learning, and the ways that how are the ways that these investments show return over time for students, for communities, and the economy? Because I feel like that's something that Congress grapples with each year, which is like, what are the good investments we should make? Is this just spending or is this an investment?
Sarah, do you want, I'm happy to start again and then pass to my colleagues on the panel. Again, a couple things on the workforce side that I think have huge implications for the learning of individuals and then also how we think about education in the future. The first on, especially again through WIOA, but our workforce development system at large, these programs really open doors to non-degree pathways for learners and workers who may be unable to designate the time and resources for a 2 or 4 year degree. The workforce system can offer quicker, more affordable, and industry-aligned programs, often in partnership with community colleges, that get people the skills more quickly to find employment and advance in their career, which I think in today's, economic transition, those paths are very critical for people so they are able to transition or get on a path to economic opportunity more quickly. However, that being said, and happy to go into more detail on this, quality does remain a big concern, Sarah, to your point about outcomes. So especially just looking at our workforce system, there's varying results coming out of the system, especially related to the education and training of the system. And that's why in recent reauthorization efforts, provider quality has been such a huge priority across party lines to ensure training individuals get actually leads to in-demand employment and career progression in some capacity. To do this, policymakers spent a lot of time on the eligible training provider list, which is, again, the list of eligible training providers the system is allowed to use, really thinking about a standard eligibility for programs, which looks more closely at participant outcomes. Also, a lot of thinking around credential transparency, so information about these credentials people are receiving. Are they working? Do they mean something in our labor market? And making sure that information is readily available and accessible to participants and students, which I think across systems, that's a conversation we're all having. And I also just wanted to say there are incentives throughout the bills that are looking at the state and local level to support more high performing education providers. The other theme I would just add here, and I think both other panelists can speak to this as well in the systems that they work more closely with, is just the workforce system's ability to really meet individuals where they are through partnerships and flexible service delivery. So again, it's a very flexible system. Again, partnering with entities like community college and other educational institutions makes this easier, but I did just want to provide a couple brief examples of pretty heartwarming stories around the country. One, during the pandemic, workforce boards were some of the only places open, especially for those out of school youth. So people who were disconnected from education and job and employment. They would go to the workforce boards to access internet, devices, and critical supports for job placement and search. An example in Madison, Wisconsin, the head of their workforce development board there would sit outside in the freezing cold in the winter in the parking lot with chairs, and young people would come in droves to access the services, even if those weren't counted in their performance measures for the federal government. So those types of things. Like I mentioned, partnership with community colleges is really critical, not only for community colleges to provide the necessary training for participants, but also to house some of these supportive services. For example, I was recently in Asheville, North Carolina. I was visiting Blue Ridge Community College, and the local workforce board actually co-locates services on the community college campus. So while Asheville itself is obviously more of a city, the surrounding regions are very rural, and they want to make sure that they reach people where they are. And luckily in North Carolina, I think our speaker previously talked about the fact that they have 58 community colleges. You're never more than 30 miles away from a community college in your area. And so it was very smart of the local workforce board to say, hey, why don't we put a one-stop in some of our service delivery at the community college campus so we can help students who are navigating their post-credential or degree journey while also helping other clients who know where the community college is and can access it effectively. And then last example of that, I just want to point to Las Vegas, Nevada. This is happening other places too, but their workforce boards locating services in libraries. So it's really reaching people because we know every community has a library. They're free. People go there often to access computers or internet or obviously books to enhance their education and career path. And so rather than a huge marketing campaign, which is obviously really hard with limited funds, why not just reach people where they are and demonstrate that these services are available to them? I know I was just talking a lot, but last thing, Sarah, I'll say on this is, other ways that these programs can incentivize learning and education is one thing, again, the workforce system does really well is signifying what is in demand in our economy, because it is very regionally based. And at the state and local level, they are working with employers, CBOs, education partners, and other critical stakeholders to determine what's in demand. And so I think what's in demand is critically important as we're developing high quality pathways into good jobs. That can inform not only the workforce programs, but also career and technical education pathways and other pathways that we know are continuing now more and more and earlier and often in even the K-12 system. So I think that's another place that these systems can really work together on building high quality pathways to good jobs in our economy. So just wanted to provide a few examples of the way I think the workforce system is really helping to move education forward, but also ways that it's partnering really effective with other systems, really effectively with other systems to get students not only the education paths that work for them, but also meeting where they are with service delivery.
And does one of the other two panelists want to jump in next?
On the higher ed
Bryce,
front,
go ahead.
I can offer that when we're thinking about students' ability to stay enrolled in higher education and to be able to complete their degrees, providing support for them to be able to access food, housing, and other basic needs is really key to helping them focus on their academics and studies. So your questions was, how do we think about how these programs impact teaching and learning? So many of the students we lose in higher education today who aren't able to make it from one year to the next, or aren't able to complete their degrees, are reporting pretty widely that that their challenges with basic needs are the reason why they had to disenroll or stop out for a while. We all know that the particularly the price and expenses of non-tuition pieces of a student's total cost of attendance have been rising pretty rapidly across the decades. Tuition and fees has risen more slowly than non-tuition expenses, and those are the expenses that students are experiencing most challenges with. So it's really about supporting student completion when we think about meeting their basic needs through SNAP, WIC, TANF, and the other programs that help them. It also alleviates a little bit of burden on the instructors in the higher education context too, because we see time and time again that a number of folks in the higher ed setting are saying they're experiencing that their students are coming to them not sure where they can access supports on their campus, not sure how they're going to be able to find their next meal, or what to do if they have an emergency childcare need. And if the campus and their larger state systems are investing in this basic needs for the students, then they're more likely to be able to focus on doing the work of teaching their students and not having to deal with sort of the individual crises that can come up when students are struggling with other non-academic problems.
I'm reminded years ago when a colleague of mine who had been a professor said that one of the things that would break his heart was when a student would come up to him and say, "Professor, I got to drop out because my car broke down and I have no way to get to school and to get home and to my job. And the choice is to get the car fixed or to keep enrolling, and I have to stop." And those are the choices you hate to see someone have to make when a little bit of additional support could make it possible if food weren't so expensive, or if tuition weren't, or if there was some extra source. Tara, I was wondering if you would talk, and I think most of us sort of get the concept of that if a student is hungry, for instance, they're not able to learn, but you want to talk a little bit about what some of these additional supports mean for teaching and learning at the K through 12 level?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think everyone gets it to this certain point, right? This nutrition is foundational for students. We have it's estimated 13.8 million children in the US who live in food insecure homes. And so these programs, especially National School Lunch and school breakfast programs that schools provide every day during the year are really critical for kids, and often some of the only meals that they can have access to. And so we know that it plays a really critical role in alleviating food insecurity. It has positive health outcomes for kids. These meals, research has shown that this is some of the healthiest meals that kids will consume. But in addition to that, when it comes to learning, there's also research that this can boost attendance. if these are meals that kids look forward to or that they rely on, they're more likely to actually come to school. And then it also has positive impacts on behavior and academic performance overall. And so it's not just about getting them the meals, it's, giving them the foundational needs that they need to then succeed in school. And so those are really like the key benefits. But I think even going back to what Bryce was saying in terms of supporting the workforce as well, and even the conversation that we just had before this in terms of recruiting teachers. I think you've all met at least one teacher or heard teachers talk about how they're constantly worried about their students and fully experience and are fully aware of the needs that their students have. And so if they know that their students need food, they're gonna figure out a way to get it to them and support them, and then it takes away from their ability to teach. But then also, I think we've all heard stories as well of teachers where this has really worn them down and they get burnt out because they can't deal with the emotional toll that it takes of taking care of their students and just their basic needs and not being able to teach math. And so I would say those are the key benefits for school nutrition. And there's plenty of studies that I'm happy to link into the chat as well.
One of the things I'm going to offer is for everyone who signed up for the webinar is that if there's some links that the panelists want to share, I will send those out so you don't have to madly try to figure out acronyms or where they might be. I'll put a couple links to some of the CEF materials in the chat. Tara, I wanted to follow up a little bit about when you were talking about sort of food at school being a resource for making school possible for a lot of students. During the pandemic, there was extra money that schools could use, and the regulations in some cases changed to allow more students to benefit from school nutrition programs. But that funding is done at the end of this month, and I wondered, Congress is not talking about providing an extra giant amount of money to continue to address this. What do you think it will mean for students in high need schools or in low income communities to have this extra school nutrition flexibility and funding no longer available?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that a lot of schools use ESSER funding to continue to provide universal school meals through accessing CEP, which is can sometimes be more expensive for a district, and so they decided to invest in that. But during the pandemic, all schools for 2 years were able to provide universal school meals. And so unfortunately, because that flexibility ended in 22, we already know what it looks like when schools have had universal school meals or healthy school meals for all program and then have had to end them. And what that really means for schools is, for a lot of families for the first time, they're having to fill out the free and reduced price lunch forms, which in some states are very long and tedious. I think there was a lot of confusion with parents of they're like, well, why are we paying for meals now when we weren't previously? And really what that means is that schools are not getting the forms that they need filled out. And so kids are falling through the cracks and not getting the meals that they need. And then also what happens, and that we've seen, and it's been an issue, but it's even more of an issue right now, is that unpaid meal debt is starting to accumulate in districts because families haven't filled out the forms. And so they're not getting the free lunch, even though they may be eligible for it, but they also can't afford to pay for lunch. And so schools now are, accumulating these huge debts that have to be covered. And some schools, you'll see PTAs or other fundraisers are taken place to kind of cover unpaid meal debt. But if it's not covered, then that means that a school has to take money from their general budget and cut right from the general budget in order to cover their school nutrition programs. Because at the end of the day, the school nutrition program cannot run into the red. A superintendent has to pass a balanced budget and has to pull funds elsewhere, which means that other educational services or programs can be cut. And in some districts, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars of unpaid meal debt. And that's just because families can't afford, the meals that their kids need. But $100,000, a few $100,000 could be, multiple teachers. And so that has an impact. And then if you will allow me, while we're talking about ESSER funds, just because, AASA has been following this for a few years now, we just put our final report out. we've seen consistently over the past 4 years asking superintendents how they've invested this money. They're investing it in expanded learning time through summer and after school learning, high intensity tutoring, whole child support. So addressing mental health needs, behavioral health needs, purchasing technology. There are a lot of investments that districts have been making to support kids that they need beyond the September 30th, 2024 deadline that unfortunately districts will have to stop, and it's going to negatively impact a lot of students.
I don't know if Bryce or Taylor want to add anything about sort of if there was funding during COVID relief that isn't going to be there anymore in your area and what impact that has.
I'll mention that we also had a significant investment from Congress during the pandemic through the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, or HEERF. About half of that went directly to institutions to help them address their emergent needs, and half went directly to the students in the form of emergency aid. And I'd say in particular, the emergency aid was really key to keeping students enrolled in higher education during an incredibly challenging time. But we know that emergencies existed before the pandemic. Students were already struggling with having access to nutritious food, dealing with the broken down car, the emergency healthcare need, the emergency childcare need. Now that that money has expired, it's really falling back on the individual institutions and states to try to figure out if they can plug the gaps, because they found out emergency aid worked to help their students, but now there's no more federal funding to do so. So one thing we're encouraging, for example, Congress to take a look at is we have a couple of different pots of money that could be repurposed for those uses or be made more flexible, like the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant was temporarily allowed to operate more flexibly as emergency aid rather than having to be awarded all upfront at the beginning of an award year, and then isn't there when students run into something halfway through their academic year. So there are different ways if Congress isn't able to renew funding for emergency aid and provide additional ongoing funding for that, they might be able to explore meeting some of those needs. And then it's going to take investments from campuses and states as well.
And Taylor, I don't know if you wanted to add anything here, or if not, I have another question I wanted to ask you. So if WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, is not reauthorized this Congress, which is a possibility because this Congress has been moving quite slowly, what happens to those programs? Are there immediate changes that would make a big difference? Things that Congress could be doing that maybe is not?
Great question, Sarah. And just to, I just want to plus one what other panelists have said about the emergency aid. And while the workforce system itself, Sarah, didn't receive a lot of federal dollars during that time, I think to underscore Bryce and Tara's point, our education system looks a lot different than it did. Our students look a lot different. And so the needs of our students are changing. And we obviously saw a lot of that come out during the pandemic. So I do think, again, the workforce system can be a good partner to your comment earlier, Sarah, on like, hey, your car breaks down. Well, the workforce system has a little bit, while the funding isn't great, has a bit more flexibility to support some of those one-off efforts for individuals. So just really looking forward to working with you all on this call to see how we can collaborate and align services a bit better. And I do think a WIOA reauthorization, to segue into that question, makes that a bit more possible in some ways. While the timeline for the reauthorization, Sarah, to your point, is shortening, I do think we still have faith that we could see something done by the end of the year, even the lame duck session, actually. This is due, I would just give staff and members a quick kudos. The staff working on this are really committed and passionate on this issue, and the members working on it are as well. Representative Virginia Fox is chair of Ed and Workforce on the House. She's no longer going to be chair after this year. And so I really think that she's working with her and Representative Bobby Scott to ensure that there is a legacy in this reauthorization process. So I do think there's some of that just goodwill that's being built across members that I hope something will be accomplished. However, it's not reauthorized. WIOA would obviously stay as is. If that's the case, funding levels would definitely not go up and potentially could even be cut. I think WIOA often is like a chicken and the egg situation. Without a reauthorization that updates the system to be a bit more effective and meet both the employers, but also the job seeker and worker needs, people aren't going to have faith in it and then will not want to invest more in it. But if you don't also invest more in it, it's hard to then see those outcomes. So it's one of those things that I do think a reauthorization will kind of reignite people's interest in the system and hopefully put money behind it once they see those better outcomes. I think, Sarah, to your point on some immediate action, I mean, I know I keep saying this in my remarks, but I think one thing on just the framing front that has to guide these conversations across education and workforce leaders is our economy is just changing drastically. We hear every day about AI and technological advancements going to disrupt our workforce. And people are going to need, regardless of their age, more rapid ways to engage in education and work. And so they might, you might be 30 and your job's obsolete and you need to figure out a way to transition into a new career. And I do think that's where our education and workforce systems can really be built up and supportive of those transitions. And I don't think necessarily policymakers always see them as that avenue, but they should be, and they could be. I think a few just really quick things in the immediate changes that I think would be important, even without a reauthorization, but hopefully with one. I really think, to ensure this high quality of programs, whether that's through education and training, but also the support services that are provided, the workforce system must keep leveraging post-secondary education infrastructure like community colleges. They're critical to meeting the education and training goals of the system. And we need to see those programs, continue to be supportive, like the Strengthening Community College Training Grant Program, which is really, from the Trade Adjustment Assistant days, again, another acronym, TAC 2.0, but really supporting these workforce and community college partnerships, to Bryce's point, to really meet students where they are while ensuring they have robust opportunity in workforce and high demand pathways. I also just think we need to also continue to support the dual mission of the system. I think there needs to be better ways to get employers as part of the solution and conversation. If they're partnering with the system and see it as being effective, they can also help support some of these activities that we talked about today. And we have seen more employers, especially larger one with more resources, invest more in their employee well-being and supports. And we need to see more of that across the country. And then additionally, I just think this conversation around supportive services is just so critical, and how the system can better support the clients that are walking through their doors, which, as I mentioned, the workforce system folks that come in are usually those that are facing barriers to education and employment. And to your point, Sarah, are, a broken down car away from losing a job, or have already lost it, or, the jobs are totally leaving their community and they have no idea what's next. And so I think there's a lot of immediate action in supporting not only employers to keep that economic development and vitality of regions, but also, of course, making sure that it's individual responsive. And I think last piece on that, and happy to get into it in final remarks, is just, again, this piece on alignment, because there's so much work happening across all these systems, and that's great, but these systems should not be operating in silos. They should really be working more closely together to really meet the needs of the individuals. And I'm happy to kind of continue to work on that and learn more from panelists today on how we see some of that alignment happening and how can federal policy help incentivize that behavior.
It's really interesting. Just follows up a little bit on what the previous panel, Superintendent Royster, was talking about, innovative ways that his school district in South Carolina has partnered the schools with community colleges so that high school students can graduate with some certifications or some education toward a teaching degree under their belt, but also the way that he has blended teacher training programs with federal funding with Clemson and a local community college, so that they can create their own teachers through the programs through students that are already there. I feel like poorly understood because it's complex, we all get K through 12, all of us went to a school, but after that, the experience is not universal. And the fact that people who are struggling with literacy, who need adult ed program education, might be getting it at a community college, or might be getting it at a library, and that people who are working with a workforce board might be getting services or training at a variety of different locations through different, all funded possibly through different, either through a local industry that is working on things. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this money is blended and braided, none of which matters to the person who gets the experience. They just need to know that it's available, but they don't always know that. Bryce, I wanted to ask you, you've been working on this for years, from different angles, from the reauthorization as a Senate staffer and as an advocate on the outside. What are some of the key changes that Congress could enact that would address student basic needs if Congress was in the in the mood to act.
Yeah, well, this could be a panel in and of itself, but since we're on the verge of wrapping up, I'll mention one in particular. As Taylor mentioned, there's a lot of overlap between what we need to do on the workforce side and what we need to do on the higher education side, and many times they are one and the same. Most students routinely report that the reason they choose to go to higher education, that they choose to pursue a college degree, or some form of certificate or other training at an institution of higher education, is because they want a good job. They want a job that sustains a family or helps them, achieve economic stability or mobility. But we have a number of programs that surgically target students enrolled in higher education and exclude them from accessing services. One thing I admire about the WIOA system is that in many ways it is flexible. It can be used for different things that help a student make it through a workforce training program. In the public benefits system, none of that flexibility exists. You have programs like SNAP and Section 8 HUD assistance that say, if you're a student enrolled half-time or more, you are not eligible if, and then the list of things that follow just really make it hard for them to be able to enroll in higher education and able to get a degree. They do it in the name of promoting work and being able to return the investment to taxpayers to be able to contribute to the economy. But the best way to do that is to obtain a degree or credential that helps them be successful. And if our programs are discouraging enrollment in higher education, which takes work, it is difficult to be a student and to go through training, then that is ultimately counterproductive. And so the best thing Congress could do, particularly when it reauthorizes the Farm Bill and the SNAP program, is remove or fundamentally reform some of those restrictions. And I think that sets the tone for a lot of the other programs. But since that one is sort of most near term, I think that's really important. There are a number of other things that Congress can do to streamline other public benefits programs. And eventually, when we get to HEA reauthorization, we'll need to take a look at some of the administrative burdens, rules, regulations that are falling directly on students and making it harder for them to stay enrolled. But I think starting with our public benefits programs is the best thing I can offer right now.
Well, that's a great segue to what I wanted to use as a final question to all of you. And Bryce, you may have sort of answered it already, which is, CEF, Committee for Education Funding, we focus on funding for education, with education being a very broad topic for us. I don't mean just Department of Ed programs, but there are a lot of other ways that Congress can help or hurt access to education and training. What is one key change Congress could enact that would improve outcomes in the way that the programs you've discussed today benefit students and learning? I know it's sort of, you've all talked about a variety of different things, and I think, writ large, your answers are flexibility and more support. But are there any things that you think, of people who are here, who are Hill staff and who are CEF members who work on this, like what would you want them to take away from this conversation?
Well, I'll just add one more quick thing and then let my co-panelists weigh in that I didn't mention. I'd say coordination between the tax writing or the finance committees and the education committees. We haven't talked about it today, but there is an enormous amount of spending that goes through the tax side of the equation that is just very poorly aligned with our other authorizing statutes on the Help Committee or the Ed and Workforce side. Tax benefits, the tax treatment of grants and scholarships, and the rules on how data does or does not get shared between the tax side and the education side. I mean, they're just fundamentally different ways of qualifying for federal student aid and these programs than there are for how you calculate income for a household for SNAP or WIC or TANF, for example. I mean, having the programs just talk to each other and be streamlined so that students don't have to apply 50 different times for 50 different programs, I think is just a pretty important key way to get toward helping students be able to afford higher education and workforce training. And if we could just get the committees to coordinate a little bit better, I think that would be a tremendous value add for basically everyone from early ed through post-secondary and workforce.
Absolutely, that same correlation exists between students who are qualifying for free or reduced price lunches, along with students who are qualified, families who may be on Medicaid or SNAP at home, and yet you have to separately apply in each place for what you might not realize you're eligible for. Tara, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and honestly, Bryce's answer kind of flows really well into mine, and it is very hard for me to choose one, I will say, if I can only choose one policy change. But I would say one program that has been really successful in terms of getting meals to kids is the community eligibility provision, which is where students are directly certified. So when families are already enrolled in SNAP, TANF, Medicaid in some states, then they are already eligible for this program. And then it's very complicated, so I won't get into the weeds, but it's one of those, right, where it minimizes the administrative burden on both the school and the individual families. And so one thing that Congress could do is increase the multiplier, which would make it more available to districts. So right now, the reimbursement structure isn't high enough to where a lot of districts are eligible to participate, but they don't have enough funding in their own district budget to cover the cost. And so if Congress increased the multiplier, it's currently 1.6, increasing it to 2.5 would mean that many more districts across the country could participate in this program, which means that all students in their districts or in the individual schools that participate would have access to meals at no charge, which means that no kids would be falling through the cracks. Every kid would be getting the meals that they need. And it also drastically reduces the administrative burden on the schools. So they're not filling out the forms. They're not having to type in a different number depending on what student is coming through the line, reporting that back to the USDA for reimbursement, right? It makes it really much easier on everyone involved. And really, at the end of the day, ensures that every kid is getting the meals that they need.
Taylor?
And yeah, Sarah, last thing, and I know I feel like I've said it a bunch of times, but I'm going to reiterate, obviously, you know, more funding for this work would be nice, as we've all said on this call. So I know that's an easy ask. But I also think, kind of building off Bryce's point around collaboration across committee, I would also advocate for more collaboration within related legislation. So thinking about our Career and Technical Education Act, our Higher Education Act, our Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, even ESSA, there's a lot of ways that we can be better at aligning these programs. So it is easier for states to then braid and blend resources and figure out how these programs should be interacting together. I think that can help, you know, if we make it easier for states to administer and implement these programs, hopefully some of the administrative burdens can be decreased. And also then we get these services and resources to individuals more easily and more quickly. So just think that anything we can do at the federal level to make it easier for states to do this work comprehensively and align service delivery, I think is really critical. And I know there's a lot of work to do on that front, but I also think there's a lot we've learned in the past couple of years because we've seen so much more collaboration at the state level and systems really coming together to serve the needs of their students and workers.
This has been really interesting. I think all of us could geek out on this a lot longer, but I want to respect all of your time. I want to thank you and the other three panelists for participating. Thank Emily for coordinating all this, and Jamie, my colleague, for helping to physically run this webinar. We will follow up with everybody. This recording will be on CEF's website on the events page in the near future. And we have a lot of other information about CEF's advocacy to increase federal investments in education along the continuum. You'll be hearing more from us, and I appreciate all of your time in both participating in the panel and for those who attended it. So thanks again very much. Bye-bye, everyone.